Hey, what's up everybody? This is Osterberg501 and today I want to go over a heavy two-handed build that can put out the most CC possible in New World. Now this build was mainly built around the idea of large-scale PvP and more specifically the wars where you can go on an attacking or defending flag and just sit on the point, put out a massive amount of CC, put out some decent damage as well, and keep yourself alive to be able to just stay in the mix of things. It can still hold its own in solo content, but it's not going to be near as good as some of the other DPS builds. And it can also be pretty decent in dungeons because you have so much CC, especially with the warhammer. And having one person at least in a lot of these dungeons with a warhammer can make your life a lot easier because the amount of CC you can put out on those enemies. And for our weapons, we're going to be using the Great Axe and the Warhammer. So first off, for the Great Axe build, I do have mine capped out. And you can definitely choose some different options with this because I know if you're having a build more specifically for war, charge is something you may not want. You may want to go with something like Maelstrom, but I think this build is a good all-arounder and also has some ability to chase down some of the backline in those wars and helps with some solo stuff. So first off, we have Reap. You pull an enemy to you and deal damage. Then we increase the range of Reap. Then we heal off of our Reap damage. And then we add a spin that does 150% weapon damage at the end of Reap. And with this spin, it also does the healing. So this spin, especially in war, you can actually like full heal yourself if you hit a bunch of enemies with the spin after. Then we have Charge. You just charge at a target, deal damage if you hit it. Then with this upgrade, you deal more damage depending on how far you travel. And this one is just mainly to get lower into the tree because the other option isn't that great. Then for our last ability, we have Gravity Well, which is one of the main parts of the Great Axe. So you just throw out a big gravity well that sucks everything in and then blows up and deals some damage. It's very good for large scale CC. And if you catch someone in this and they can't roll out of it, they can't do anything, you have a pretty good chance of being able to finish that person off. Then we increase the burst damage by 10% for each foe caught in the vortex, so it can deal a bit more damage. And then our allies gain 10% fortify while standing in our well, which is just a damage reduction. Very helpful for war. And I'm pretty sure this should work for us. I haven't seen any testing to see if this works for us or if it's just our allies or not. Then for our passives, we have our light attacks, increase our damage by 5%, stacking up 3 times. And our Great Axe is going to be our more damage centric part of the build. Our Warhammer is more so going to be for CC, and then if we want to deal damage, we bring out the Great Axe. We penetrate 10% armor on enemies that are lower than 50% health. When we crit with our Great Axe, we heal ourselves for 10% of the damage, which can get pretty massive when you're cleaving multiple enemies. Our attacks against enemies below 30% health crit 15% more often, so now we can heal more often when the target's lower. And then when the target's below 30%, we heal for 10% of all of the damage on that target. So notice with the Great Axe, we can actually heal ourselves up quite a bit, especially if we're getting a bunch of crits, a bunch of cleave crits to multiple targets. You'll notice you're getting a ton of healing. Then our ultimate Bloodlust is pretty ridiculous. You move 30% faster and deal 15% more damage when looking at a foe within 15 meters. And this is just anything, any PvE creatures, any enemy players, anything, this will proc. And if you're looking at somebody, you're going to get this buff. So it's pretty ridiculous. Then we have heavy attacks with the Great Axe, pull foes closer to you. This can definitely help with sticking on ranged targets or trying to run away from you a little bit better. Adds grit to your heavy attacks and grants 20% damage reduction with heavy attack grit. And grit just stops you from being interrupted. I definitely need to use my heavy attacks more, especially for war. These two I think are a little bit more so for solo content, dungeons, stuff like that. I don't use Great Axes as much in wars because you're switching around your weapons, using your abilities so much you don't get as much of a chance. Then we get 10% damage if 3 or more foes are within 4 meters. So helpful for dungeons if you're grouping up enemies in solo, and it'll be up 100% of the time in war. Then we get 10% damage reduction when 3 or more enemies are close to us. So the same thing, and now it's just a damage reduction. Now for my Great Hammer, now I don't have this maxed out because I've only started to just use it again and started using it in wars and trying it out in solo combat. So it's only 14, but I'll go over what I would put those extra 6 points into. So for our abilities, we just go all right side, Shockwave, which is just an AoE around us that deals 80% weapon damage and stuns all targets for 2 seconds. And it's not that big of a radius, but it can catch a lot of people in it, especially if you're in a war. You reduce the damage dealt by the targets you hit with this by 10%, and we increase the radius to 4-meter radius, which makes it a little bit bigger. It's still not the biggest radius, but it's pretty decent with that upgrade. Then at clear out, we just swing our hammer in front of us, knocking enemies back and dealing 150% weapon damage. And when we hit a target with clear out, we give ourselves and our allies a 10% defense bonus. Again, incredibly strong for wars. Clear out's cooldown is reduced by 5% per enemy hit, so you can get it back pretty quickly if you're hitting a bunch of enemies. And then when we use this, we gain haste, giving us 30% movement speed for 3 seconds. So after we use it, we can run around, try to reposition or chase somebody down. Then for our final ability, we have Path of Destiny. We slam our hammer down. It does a big linear wave in front of you that does 110% weapon damage, and it is a pretty long range and it's pretty thick as well. And then our Path of Destiny now staggers, so now it adds a CC to that, and this makes it be incredibly strong for CC. You can hit a ton of enemies with that. And then its ability cooldown is reduced by 5% for every enemy hit, so large scale combat, you'll be able to get this back much quicker. Then for our ultimate, whenever we affect an enemy with a crowd control, they are also slowed by 20%, so just adding more CC on top of all of our other CC. Then the other two passives we have, and this is the absolute main one, and one of the big reasons you go on the right side, you regain 35% of the damage dealt as health when using a crowd crusher ability. So that's all 3 of our abilities that we're using for our Warhammer. We heal for 35% of the damage dealt. And you'll see, especially in wars, even in dungeons and stuff like that, if you hit a bunch of targets with one of your abilities, you're going to get a big chunk of your health back. Then we deal 50% more damage against targets affected by any debuffs by our Warhammer, so it'll be a 15% damage increase a lot of the time. Now I have 6 more points I could use, and I would probably be getting the heavy attack increasers. So we would get an attack damage increase of 20% after using a heavy attack. We would add grit to our heavy attacks, so we have damage reduction and it can't be interrupted during it. You could get this where if they're under 30% health, you deal 15% more damage with the heavy attacks, and cooldowns are reduced by 7% with heavy attacks as well. All of those are going to be pretty good options. And then power through pain down here as well. For 1 second after taking damage, deal 35% extra damage. And it's something like a war or a dungeon where you're going to have healers and be constantly taking damage. You could have this procced a lot of the time. So there's still a lot of power I could get from leveling up my Warhammer more, and it's already really strong as is. Now for the attributes, I made it pretty simple. I got up to 300 strength so I could get all of the bubbles, which are very strong, and then I went the rest in the constitution. Now at a baseline, I would make sure to always at least have 100 constitution. That will increase your survivability massively, and you can change this around and add more into constitution if you're feeling too squishy, because especially getting the 3rd bubble, which makes you take 10% less crit damage, will give you a massive increase to survivability, especially in PvP. So just change that around depending on how you're feeling in combat. And like I said, getting all the strength bubbles are incredibly strong, so going through those, and I'm not going to go over the profession buffs. This is just going to be focused on combat stuff. So we get 5% damage to light attacks, we get 10% damage to heavy attacks, 50 plus stamina damage from your light and heavy attacks, 10% damage on stunned, slowed, or rooted enemies, which is very good specifically for this build. Our stamina regens faster while performing light and heavy attacks. And then the last one is pretty strong, so your light and heavy attacks have grit. And what grit is you're uninterruptible. So when you're doing any light or heavy attacks with your melee weapons, you're now uninterruptible once you get 300 strength. And that is incredibly strong, especially in PvP and when going up against groups of PvE mobs. And the reason I say go with 100 constitution baseline is the first buff, all health consumables are 20% stronger. So that's potions, that's eating, that's water, everything. And I'm not 100% certain, but I do think this does increase some other effects. Like it seems to increase the healing over time from my legendary jewelry piece, which I'll go over when we get to the gear. And then the second one is increase your max health by 10% of your physical armor, and that is also very strong for this build since we're going with heavy armor, so we'll have a lot more physical armor, so a lot more health. Now for our gearing, I don't have anything crazy for perks as of right now. Everything's pretty basic because I started gearing as intellect once I hit 60, so I just bought a bunch of gear to get much better strength gear for this build. So I pretty much don't have any specific perks. Everything I'm rolling is just all heavy armor with strength rolls on everything, and the main reason for that is this isn't a tank build. You want to be able to be tanky enough to stay in the center of the fight, but also have enough damage to where you're actually able to kill things. So I'm all heavy armor with strength, except my chest piece, which is medium, but that's just because it's a much higher tier chest piece right now. But normally I would say go all heavy armor. You're also probably going to need that when doing any solo stuff. Once you hit 60, the enemies just hit so hard that doing a build like this without heavy armor, you're just going to die too quickly. So just all heavy armor with strength. I will be doing an update video once I get better armor with specific perks and stuff like that, but I'm not at that point, and I don't think a lot of other people are at the point of choosing different perks on armor yet. For our jewelry, I have the Infinity Crystal for my necklace, which is from a quest line once you hit 60. Really good for this build. Strength, we have increased healing, Fortify lasts longer, and we have 9% increase in max health. Super good, perfect for this build. I'm still using the Weaver's Knot. I should definitely get a better one for combat, but the Weaver's Knot still gives Constitution. Double luck roll, still an incredibly strong piece. Then I have the legendary Ill-Gotten Gain jewelry piece, which is incredibly strong, especially for a build like this. It gives Constitution, rolls the strike damage absorption gem. You can put whatever gem you want in it. Potion cooldowns are 25% faster, so we can just use much more potions. We heal for 0.43% of our health every second, which is super good because we do have a good chunk of health. And when you drink a potion, you have a chance not to consume it. That one isn't combat stuff, but that one's just super nice, especially if you're just hitting 60. You still don't have a ridiculous amount of resources, so you can try to use less potions. You don't have to spend as much money or resources on those potions. And then for our weapons, for our great axe, we rolled strength. I have a gem that turns some of our damage into fire. And then the main thing you're going to want to find on a great axe is the keen roll, which is a critical strike chance increase. And the reason for that is because we heal off of our crits with our great axe. So we want as much crit chance with that as we can possibly get. That's the one roll that if you're looking for a perk, look for keen. Then for our great hammer, we have a strength roll. I have a damage increasing gem when stamina is full. And then on crit, we gain 15% in power for 5 seconds. A pretty good perk, but again, pretty simple for a warhammer, just a strength roll and whatever other damaging perk you can get on it. So that is pretty much the entirety of this build. It may not be the most flashy build when you're in wars or be able to put out the most DPS in dungeons or stuff like that, but this build in wars, in dungeons, in open world PvP is going to be incredibly good for your teams and whatever you're doing, just because you can put out so much CC and just sit in the middle of the fight while putting out a ton of CC and a good amount of damage. So subscribe if you want to see more New World or other MMO videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about this build, and thanks for watching.